You ever have that journey with a friend for a long road, approximately 5 years, and it's a fucking great trip, but you guys get into some shit along the way, you know? And overall, at the end of the day, you feel like it was a really cool, good learning, growing experience. And then a few years pass by, and then you get back and you see that friend, and you find that they haven't changed at all. You ever have that situation, Chris?
Yeah, and you feel really good about your decision to stop hanging out with them? Is that where you're going with that next?
Kind of. That's sort of where I was going with this. I mean, I feel like that perfectly, like...
If that's where you're going with this, then yeah, I have a lot of those kind of friends.
So that was a little bit of a confusing intro. I apologize, but...
Well, I get what you're saying.
Yeah, we're back. It's me, Dom, the movie nerd, on Talkin TV with my good friend, Chris.
Good friend,
and co-host.
Exactly.
There you go.
Hell yeah, man.
You thought I was going to forget that, didn't you? Didn't you? Nah, but I'm Dom, and this is Chris, and we're back on Talkin TV, as per usual. We even got a couple cold ones, too, this time, and we are here...
Did you miss us?
What?
Oh, I'm asking them, did they miss us?
Oh, I mean, I can't answer for that. Why are you asking me as if I'm the audience?
I just like to try and give the audience a voice. I hear other radio personalities and people do it, and they do it so well. And I feel like every time I try and do it, you're just thrown off by it. But I'm gonna keep trying to do that.
That's good. That's good because the goal should be to throw me off. Because I'm obviously not gonna hit my points every time, and you know that. So
well, then this must be Freaky Friday, because today I'm completely thrown off by what we just watched.
What? I thought it was Freaky Friday because, like, just the whole switching bodies. I mean, I'm like, I don't think I switch bodies with you. I don't think...
Well, because usually I'm not too thrown off when it comes to this podcast.
Okay.
But today I just feel
off.
Like months of build-up for little payoff, in my opinion.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you bring that up and build that up that way because the title of what we're talking about, I mean, you guys could probably already guess if you clicked on the podcast, but we're talking about El Camino, subtitle, a Breaking Bad movie, which... as you know, was an idea that was thrown around and rumored to have happened for years. You know, Vince Gilligan, obviously, very quickly, only about a year and a half after Breaking Bad ended, he moved on to Better Call Saul, which is the prequel series that what's really not a prequel, because it's not about Walt, but that follows the origin of Saul Goodman, Bob Odenkirk's character from Breaking Bad, which now, having wrapped its 4th season a year ago and about to enter its 5th season, is already being hailed by people as the next Breaking Bad. And now, Vince Gilligan is a guy that, after this movie, El Camino, I firmly trust as a writer because it's just the what he crafts is just so different from everything else. But the thing that I want to get at is, with Gilligan with Breaking Bad, right? You usually get into this idea of, you know, like for the fans. You know, that's been a big thing that's kind of been a thing this past decade, is for the fans, and everything is for the fans, and the fans want it, and fan service, and, you know, all of this different stuff, you know, to the point where you literally feel like you have entire movies that feel like they were written by the fans. You know, that's been a very common phrase that has gone to. And what interested me here is that Vince Gilligan is one of those people that clearly loves his creations as much as his fans do, because this whole idea to come back and follow what happened to Jesse right after the ending of Breaking Bad, where he goes streaking off in that El Camino, in that wickedly insane combined crying laughter that rightfully won Aaron Paul an Emmy for his last season. And yeah, Vince had the idea for this, and he wanted to go through with it, and he made it. And now we're here, and it has officially been released on Netflix. It is a full 2-hour conclusion to Breaking Bad.
Oh, don't I know it's 2 hours?
Oh, yeah. And so, yeah, we've been hinting at it. We've been beating around the bush a little bit in terms of our own common thoughts. But so, Chris, let's just get it out of the way. You've been holding this in since we watched this, so let's hear it. What are your thoughts on El Camino, a Breaking Bad movie? Movie, right? Yeah, it's movie.
All right. So I'm just going to say up front, I think you can't speak about El Camino without telling your feelings about how you felt about Breaking Bad.
Obviously.
So I loved Breaking Bad. I mean, I watched it once. I watched the last season when it was airing, so I caught up, and I was able to watch the last season live. And I thought that was really fun. It was awesome. Still think about that show all the time.
It's a great show. There's a reason why people hail it as one of the best of all time.
I haven't even seen it twice. I've only watched it once, and my memory's not the best, you know that. Dom knows that, but it's not many details get fuzzy about Breaking Bad. And I think that's a testament to the show, because life happens. A lot has happened in the past year since it's gone off the air. It still resonates with me. And I'm sure if I watched it again...
Wait a minute, the last year since it went off the air?
Years.
I was about to say.
Yeah.
It's been 6 years.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. Okay. You know? And so for me, that show is very special. And I didn't watch Better Call Saul. I watched the first few episodes. It didn't quite pull me in. Yeah,
it's definitely a slow burn, I will say. But I finished the first season. I really, really liked how the first season ended. But I agree that it was very good. But I do agree. Better Call Saul, it was, for me at least, a much more difficult show to get into than Breaking Bad.
Yeah. Now I'm going to go back and watch it because I feel like, as an aspiring critic, it's not right to...
Yeah, I was about to say, don't watch it if you feel like you're obligated to. Like, that's one of the things I feel like I should stress is that I don't watch things because I feel like I'm obligated to.
Well, I feel like I am, and it's because what I'm about to say about this movie is going to be so poor for a franchise I love so much. So I think I got to round out the way I feel.
Too, if you just talk about it like real quick, is that like now we even regard like TV shows as franchises because that's kind of what they are in this crazy weird age that we live in of media.
Well, I only really was able to get through like 2 minutes of the Double Toasted review of this on my way over here, but he's right when Corey said like we now have a Breaking Bad universe. And a whole nother conversation is when will this stop? Because I really want all of this franchising and universe building.
Franchising or interconnected universes franchising. Because obviously we've gotten to the point now where it's not just the same type of franchising that we're used to. Like, it's the idea of just like everything is interconnected and you have to watch. I've had all of this build up and know about all this stuff beforehand so that you could truly appreciate everything. You know, it's the idea of turning everything into an event.
Right. And I don't want everything to be an event. Right. Sometimes I'm okay with it just being like a Goodfellas. Like, we're in, we're out, and it lives on because it's a solid story that doesn't need more elaboration on that. And I get it. It's not the new way people create. I get it. But for me, it definitely tainted Breaking Bad. Now having two universe type things I could have explored off of the initial show that have both... Better Call Saul didn't grip me, so that fell flat, but I'm going to give it a second chance. But I definitely was not entertained with El Camino. Didn't look at my phone, but I was fighting looking at my phone to check my fantasy football stats because I was that bored.
Got it.
We can talk about specifics, obviously.
Well, yeah, definitely. And we'll get into specifics, but I just also wanted to touch on that real quick. The idea of... what's it called? The event, right? You were talking about, you actually mentioned Goodfellas, and I actually wanted to touch on that a little bit, is that, because that also kind of feeds into the Martin Scorsese quotes that have been dropping a little bit, where he's been kind of going after Marvel movies a little bit, and we don't need to talk about that here, but the idea that, what you just mentioned, right? The idea of when is this going to stop? When can everything kind of just go back to being just a movie? Because that's a thing that a lot of people have talked about, right? Is that, you know, it's funny. Honest Trailers even mentioned it in the last Avengers Endgame, where in the Avengers Endgame Honest Trailer, they talked about how Endgame also serves as like a backdoor pilot for their TV shows. And it's like, and they even have a joke in there where it's like, hey guys, remember when movies could be just a movie? And to bounce off that point is that's the problem, because if something is just a movie now, Chris, we have so much media. We can flip out our phones and put on anything we want at any point. Do you really think that anything is ever going to go back to being just a movie? No, because people don't want to watch it because they're already watching all their other stuff. You know, a fucking YouTube video is just a movie. So if you want to what are the big draws? The events. Because that's what's going to get everyone out, and that's what's going to get the money. Because before, movies could make money by being just a movie. Now, not the case.
Right. So here's the way I see it. And then after this little tidbit, we'll try and work our way into talking about El Camino, the Breaking Bad movie. But I think we got to dive into this right now. So the way I see it is that Aliens and Predator and Star Wars, they weren't an event when they first came out, right?
Right. They were really well-crafted, really awesome concepts that were made by actual people who worked in the industry and were really good at what they did. And not just because of one person. That's the thing. Everybody loves to give credit to one person because it's the internet and it's easy. But like, it is not just one person. I'm sorry. As much as George Lucas is a mastermind, George Lucas is not is the sole reason why Star Wars is Star Wars. Ridley Scott is not the sole reason why Alien is Alien, you know? James Cameron is not the sole reason why Terminator is Terminator, you know?
Right, Terminator, another franchise.
Yeah, exactly. So there's so many different working hands and working behind that. You know, producers, makeup designers, everybody that's on set. You know, you've been on set, I've been on set. There's so many different people working at a time just to make those visions possible, you know?
Right. So and I agree. And what I'm getting at is, where is the barrier to entry now? So for a long time, people were all, rightfully so, saying that like there's not really a place for female directors or women really in this industry.
Right, which we always knew was nonsense, but that was just the message that Hollywood and the world perpetuated. So
whether that's right or wrong, steps have been made, and the landscape seems to be leveling out a little more in favor of equality, which is fine. But what I'm trying to take from that point, raising that right now, is think about this, right? So that barrier to entry has now been squashed. But what is there a barrier to entry for now in Hollywood? I personally think the original thought. I think that why can't
you're not wrong there at all.
Why can't we have why aren't people going to see Ad Astra in theaters in the same numbers as they're going to see Endgame? Why are we so addicted to franchising, and why are so many creators going that route? You know, like why did we get 2 more seasons of Stranger Things when we heard initially up front that the Duffer Brothers only had that 1 season written and that's all they ever really wanted to tell? Why is
I don't know about
Breaking Bad?
It's just a matter of like we knew that's what they had.
Right. There was no real plans, but then Netflix offered them the big check and they took it. Like, why are we just? I don't know. It just,
Well, I mean, I can give you the easy answer. The easy answer is because it's popular and because that's what people want to watch, because that's what makes money. But
I'm just sick of it. This felt like a cash grab, this movie. It's like we didn't need more of this.
And I don't blame you, because that, again, it speaks to the whole larger problem of our culture and what everybody's been talking about for years now, where everything is franchises and reboots. But for right now, the problem is we're going to keep complaining about it, because for right now, that's where the money is. Because at the end of the day, Hollywood is still a business, first and foremost. We can talk about, and I've been saying this for years now, is that at the end of the day, we can talk about creative endeavors all we want. Creative endeavors are good. That's what makes Hollywood good. That's what makes Hollywood good at what they do. But at the end, and why they've been, for lack of a better word, a kind of at this point world power, more so Disney than Hollywood itself, but Hollywood has been a world power. It's what's made them that way. But it's not just the creativity, it's the money. It's always been the money. It's what drives the world economy. They always follow where the good ideas that make money go. And right now, it's the ideas that are making money are the reboots or the superheroes. And that's about it.
Right, and that kills me, because, that's a part of the reason why I don't like this movie, and I have separated them, and I have my more film critique thoughts as to why I don't like this movie. But a big part of that is, it's just like me, just so you guys know, like, I'm a musician, I'm in a band, yada, yada, yada. I create in multiple ways. Critiquing film is a newer avenue for me, but it's discouraging, because at least in music, people are always pushing the envelope, trying to come up with new sounds, and it's encouraged to try something new. It's not like, hey, so-and-so put out this big album, so let's only listen to his next album when it comes out in 2 years. It's like, dude, Old Town Road came out of nowhere. No one knew who Lil Nas X was before that. And people love when those people pop up in the music industry. Yep. So why are, like, there are the franchise level artists, like you have your Beyonce and Rihanna's, who are like now established names, but there's always room for entry of smaller people to become bigger fish in music. Why don't we have that in film? Why am I just being subjected to this blockbuster culture?
It's always been difficult, right, to break into film. You always hear those stories, people blow up and then it turns out, some people have had like 30 years of working before they get into, because it's just that difficult. And there's always been that part of it. But the other thing too is that
it's just discouraging. And I'm not saying I'm blind to the fact that there aren't new creators coming about and new stories coming about. Look at Jordan Peele, but they're too few and far between.
Right, because
I'm sick of this blockbuster onslaught.
Right, but I think I think the thing that you're also getting at too is this idea of, what makes it big. What is it that like shocks the world, and the problem with that is, regardless of what the content is now, it could be any sort of content. It's just the problem is the internet, and just the fact that we have too much content. So regardless of what was big right now, whether it would be the blockbusters or the superheroes, regardless was what would be big, the problem is it's so easy for something to get lost in the shuffle. And if anything, it's so much harder now for something to break out. So it was already difficult before for original ideas to break out, but now it's even more difficult. So that's why I keep constantly go back to when I brought up Ad Astra, and you talked about that too. Why that was so, like I said, I'm amazed that Ad Astra still even got made and released in theaters, and how I'm so convinced that had that movie not been like ready to go when Disney bought Fox, they never would have released it, because nobody would have watched it regardless of that, because those types of movies are not what people go out to see. Because again, why it's the age-old argument and why Netflix is killing everything else. Why are you going to go out and spend however much money to watch a movie in a crowded theater with a bunch of people who clearly don't give a shit about what they're watching, who are all on their phones, talking, whatever? Like, the idea of the traditional idea of going to the theater and just the traditional idea of, like, you know, going out, enjoying something with everybody else and talking about it afterwards, that idea, as much as we love to still champion it, that idea is still being propped up by the blockbusters. That's what's keeping that idea alive. Because if not for those blockbusters, everything else would, like, theaters would be closed down, you know? And it's funny because depending on who you talk to, you know, I've talked to people on sets, you know? And I've talked to those types of people, and for those types of people, it's never been a better time to be a creator and to be in that field and to be getting into something.
No,
because
I get it.
you get things like Netflix and Amazon that are taking like a million different creative ideas. The problem is because it's so oversaturated, you can get a million creative ideas in there. You know, there are so many different amazing and incredible ideas for movies and TV shows that we are hearing that are getting made and approved every single day. We just don't hear about them because there's so many of them and because it's so much harder for something to hit, you know?
And I totally agree with everything you just said. And I see the positives to the blockbusters still keeping theater culture alive. I understand that. And I know that creators for more obscure shows, like I recently watched Netflix's Bloodline with my folks. And so that's like, maybe that wouldn't have gotten picked up by a network, but Netflix gives that a space to have a cult following. I just think that we've been trained through marketing and for the past like 20 years or so, since the 90s, when this whole like Disney, I want to say like
takeover. You can call it what it is. It's a takeover.
When this whole Disney takeover really began, I think we've sort of been trained to get a certain type of experience from our movies, and we've lost a certain type of experience, and it makes me sad. And I know I'm not going to be able to do anything about it. I just had to go there because I didn't want people to think like, oh, this guy's so one-sided. He's not seeing the benefits of it. Right, I see the benefits. I'm just sick of having people hit me up to go and see Ant-Man. Like, what? I wish I could have been in a time where someone calls my goddamn landline and they're like, hey, there's this new movie out called Goodfellas, or hey, there's this new movie out called like Gremlins. Like, you want to go check it out? And I'm like, okay, this sounds interesting. Like, everything is so the same in mainstream blockbuster culture right now. To me.
And again, like I said, I'm not going to disagree with you there because I get where you're coming from, but also at the same time think about that, you know, it's like, if you want to think about, like, in the 70s, like, there were still a lot of old film school pros that were, like, looking and it's like, oh, God, what are these new kids doing? You know, what
I
is
get
this
it.
crap?
That's the tale
as old as time. You know, it's always going to be that case of, like, the older generation looking down at the new stuff, you know? But again, but there is something to be said about the presence of the internet because that's the one thing that makes our generation different from others past. You know, and I've gotten pretty good at distinguishing actual legitimate problems and arguments people have towards this modern day and age versus just the old cranks who just wish that it was the way that things were the way that they used to be when they're never going to be, you know, when those are just the people who like can't get with the times or whatever. But no, you're right, that is a legitimate issue. And I also think it's funny that we ended up talking about like Blockbuster, how the Blockbuster is propping up the modern day theater craze when we're talking about a Netflix movie too.
Well,
we haven't even talked about the movie too, which I find hilarious.
My next thing was I was going to be like, so Dom, I feel like if there was anyone in the room right now who could explain why this tangent is relevant to what we're about to talk about, let's connect the dots now.
Yeah, definitely.
Explain that to the people. Why did this conversation just happen before we even talked about the movie?
Well, because you were unsatisfied with it and because you felt like this movie erupted not as a result of a creator's need to actually create something in order to finish something, but you felt like it erupted out of the perpetual fan culture to constantly rinse and repeat and give the same thing over and over again, you know, as a mask of, oh, we're doing something completely new. You know, it's the one thing why you hate the Marvel movies. And I'm not, like I said, it's one of the reasons why I've never fought you on the Marvel movies, because even though I enjoy them, I still know what they are. I know that they're
This is true, he really
preconceived packaged products that are fed to an audience that knows exactly what they're going to get and still goes anyways because that's at the end of the day what people want. They, you know, and it's always the problem of what Hollywood has realized. So in terms of El Camino, that's why I'm not going to fight you on that because yeah, I may like it and you may not, but at the end of the day, it's still going to feel that way, even if the motivation and the reasoning behind it is not, you know? And I'm wondering, and I don't know if that's because of the movie itself or just because of the age that we live in. You know, obviously you always have to take everything with a grain of salt in terms of like society's factor, because society obviously does matter towards movies. Society and the age you live in, you know, you look at the decade, each individual decade and of the last 100 years of film since film became a thing and what influenced film, it's always what's going on at the time, you know, from the... You know, from the political thrillers of the 70s to, you know, what's it called? To the anti-depression, feel-good, happy, cheery movies of the 30s. You know, the films always reflect the time in which they are released. You know, it's just. And, you know, it's just this idea of, you know, it's just we're becoming more aware of that as time goes on. Is that films are emblematic of this very cold, very inhumane, for lack of a better word, corporate, like, controlled setting that we're living in.
Right, and I think any creator of any type, whether it be a painter, a musician, a craftsman, you know, we are directly affected by the world we live in, as is everyone else. And so now let's talk about this movie, right? Because you raised two great questions that I think would be awesome jumping points to really dive in and talk about Breaking Bad, El Camino, the movie.
Yes.
Although, you're right, I do agree with everything you just said.
Thank you.
I don't know. I honestly don't know if it's a reflection of the times, which is why I was not a fan of this straight-to-Netflix movie, or if it's just because I'm sick of the fan service culture, or if it was just a bad movie, right? Those are like the three things you really just said.
Well, the one thing I can say is that, to me at least, it wasn't a bad movie. It was very well filmed. And the fact that Gilligan was able to translate so many, for lack of cinematic techniques that people called cinematic on the TV show that I would agree with, they were cinematic techniques from a 5-season AMC TV show, and have them translate over so well to film. I don't know if that's just because people have like that lower expectation, or again, just like because of how Netflix has changed the game. But to me, I thought that the idea of Breaking Bad just translated over so well to film that even regardless of how it felt, whether it actually felt like a movie or whether it felt like an extended episode of the TV show, just the look and feel of it felt like I was watching a movie. Like, this was what, like, you can call it what you want, and like I said, I may be like a Breaking Bad, like, buying into the fan service, whatever, but this to me was more cinematic than most of the cinematic movies that I've seen in theaters this year.
I mean, I can't argue.
But that's something new. I've been saying that for years. I was saying 2 years ago about how Game of Thrones was doing things better than most theaters were going. You know, look at this past year. You know, regardless of how we thought about the writing, the long night, the craft in that episode alone was better than 99.9% of the content that we've gotten in theaters this year. And that is just a hard-based fact in terms of the craft. Like, nobody can deny that, regardless of their individual problems with that.
Yeah, I'll agree to that. And you know, it's funny. I don't know if it's because of what you just said or not, you know, but to me, let's talk about the movie now. We flirted around it too much, but it's important. We had to talk about that. Now,
context is important.
Context is important,
Context
especially
is very important,
especially with how I feel about this film, and you'll be the counter argument, and it'll make for good fodder.
Of course.
So it felt to me the biggest turnoff from this movie was how I knew everyone wasn't phoning it in, but it felt like everyone was phoning it in. And the only person who felt natural in their role was Skinny Pete. Everyone else, it felt to me like, hey, we're breaking out Muhammad Ali, and he's going to take a crack at McGregor. So, you know, he still might have it. He might have it, but the fight's on, and you know, McGregor knocks out Muhammad Ali in 10 seconds, because if he was alive, he'd be like a 70-year-old man.
Right.
And that's what it felt like. It's no one's
older than 70, but
fair enough. Whatever. You know what I'm trying to say? It's no one's fault.
Yeah.
I just think that not only did this movie, I think, come at too late of a time, as far as to when the show was off the air to now, but I think like a big thing in that is it's like these actors played those characters for years. They got to finesse and fine tune. If you look at Jesse Pinkman from season 1 to season 5. The nuances and the depth of the character was greatly developed and explored.
Literally to the point where he couldn't find work playing anybody else.
Which is the point. Exactly. And that's because he did such a good job. He was Jesse Pinkman. No one else could see him as anything else.
Yeah, and that's a Hollywood tale as old as time, too, where actors play a role so well that they get typecast for years. You know, it's pretty much like almost every comedy actor in the 90s and 2000s.
Right, and some would say that's the dream. That's besides the point. But I think that's a testament to how good of a job he did as that character. Now, that's why I think that for many reasons this doesn't work, is because Breaking Bad to me was all about the characters. It's not one of those weird, obscure, avant-garde TV shows. It's pretty straightforward. You know, it's your classic cable, but it's taken that to the next level because it was in the real cinematic boom of television in the early 2000s. But it still had the
late
traditional
2000s, early 2010s. But yeah,
right. You know what I mean? It's like it had Lost and it had other shows before it to pave the way and really push the boundaries. And now Breaking Bad came in and really was like, okay, we're gonna take
Sopranos.
Exactly, shows like that to pave the way for it, and we're gonna take this and run with it. So my big issue, honestly, with this film is the fact that we spent so much time with these characters, and we got such a depth of presence from everyone, from Badger, from Skinny Pete, from Mike. Like the list goes on. We got to really know these characters in such a different way than television was showing us prior, that in this movie, it just sort of felt like, okay, so fuck, we have such a limited time to get this done, and it's been a while, and we all think we're doing a great job, but guess what? We're not, because this didn't translate well to me for being a movie. You don't want just 2 hours with these characters, because quite honestly, I don't think they ever really got warmed up in their performances.
And like I said, before we get into my thoughts on the movie, my whole thing with that is, and I'm just wondering, because this also goes into a lot. There's been a lot of TV movies that have come after the ending of a long series run, and this is a thing we run into almost every single time they talk about it.
So we're going to consider Netflix a TV movie.
Like, not even like a month ago with the Downton Abbey movie that came out that was a theatrical release. We've gotten 2 Sex and the City movies, Entourage. It's happened a lot. This is not the first time that this happened where we get a movie wrapping up, coming after a famous TV show. But what I wanted to get at is that, do you think that if this movie had come out a few years earlier, do you think that would have, I don't want to say changed your opinion, because obviously, different people over time, you're obviously not the same person when you think, but again, if this movie comes out, say this movie comes out before Better Call Saul in 2015, 2 years before, as opposed to 6 years after in 2019, do you think that makes any bit of difference?
Yes, because I think that every character and the writers, the entire creative vision just felt a little outside of the sweet spot they were in on that season 5, riding the high of 4 great seasons prior, one of the most encapsulating shows of its time. I feel like they had lightning in a bottle and they were trying to recreate it. So I think the further away you get from that, the less you have of that feeling, of that space they were in. And so, yes, I think this came out earlier. It's hard to say, this is a very weird hypothetical, but I do think that the longer you wait to put out a movie like this, for whatever franchise it's in, whatever series it comes from, the longer you wait, the more you run the risk of it feeling disingenuous, like it did. So,
okay. I can get where you're coming from there. Well, just to put this in perspective, probably the closest example that I can think of is the Entourage movie, which came out 4 years after the show ended. That show went off the air in 2011, and then the movie came out in 2015. I remember because that was one of the first movies that, like, when I was really getting into, like, going to the theater every weekend to see something new, and that was one of the movies that I was like, that was like, I think that was like a month or two. Like, it was right around the time when I graduated high school in summer of 2015, and that one, to me, it was just like, it was exactly what the show was following up. And I think that's kind of where we're looking at this in different lenses, where if we're just looking at it from the context of the show, I think this movie was absolutely perfect in terms of how it wrapped up, both in terms of both returning you to the world and wrapping up where it went with the characters. Now, now as a film itself, I did have problems. It wasn't perfect, but in terms of just in the sense of getting you refamiliarized with the world of Breaking Bad, this film was perfect. Tonally, stylistically, craft-wise, portrayal-wise, everything. It was like, this film was exactly what it needed to do, in terms of what it was setting out to do and what Vince Gilligan wanted to do with this. Yeah, like I said, in terms of the time, yeah, I can't really argue with that, but in terms of, like, what this film was setting out to accomplish, I feel like it did everything there, And in terms of critiquing the craft itself, again, I would have to go back and watch all 5 seasons of Breaking Bad in order to do that, and I haven't done that in a few years. Because I caught the show late. I didn't start watching the show until after the final season had wrapped.
Yeah, I can see why you would think that. I feel like most people probably think like that. I gotta be in the minority on this. Yeah. I understand that. It's just that, like, if you had to, gun to my head, I have to make a list of my 10 most influential performances I've seen in television, right? Because I think television's in a renaissance. That's a whole different podcast in and of itself. But I do think that, and I think it's because of shows like Breaking Bad, because of shows like Lost, because of shows like Game of Thrones pushing the boundaries, Jesse Pinkman is easily top 3. So for me to see a sad, older, out of character, out of Jesse Pinkman-esque version of this character, and a lot of it's the writing, But it's also
See, that's why I couldn't disagree with you more. I could not disagree with you more in that sense. This was...
I think Aaron Paul lost the feel of the character, the mannerisms.
I could not disagree with you more.
They didn't feel there, that the intricacies that made me love this bumbling idiot who's eccentric but is just so good-hearted. I didn't, and I know it's a completely different part of his journey. I get that, okay? I understand that, but it didn't seem like the growth we would have had from the character we watched 5 seasons of in this film. It just felt like... Let's toss him in a fucking, how have I been describing this movie to people? He's gotta get out of Dodge. So let's put Jesse. How would Jesse Pinkman get out of Dodge? And that's like the whole movie, and it's just so
fascinating
boring
to me because, like I said, if it was anybody else directing that, I might be inclined to agree with you. But because this is Jesse Pinkman, and not just that, but because it is Vince Gilligan coming back to do the scene, it's like, oh man, like the minute that I see him on screen, and it's not even like in modern day, it's a flashback to a previous scene. The opening scene is him talking with Mike from a previous scene that was not in the show. Like, to me, I'm like, oh man, this is Jesse Pinkman, And I don't know if part of that because I haven't seen, I don't know if part of that is because I haven't seen, Aaron Paul give a lot of variety in the very few roles that I've seen outside of Breaking Bad, but like, oh man, like everything that Aaron Paul was bringing to this role, like in terms of the mannerisms and everything, and yeah, I get it, different phase of his life, but it's funny that you mentioned that because the whole thing about this performance is that there are moments in the movie where he's playing Jesse. He arguably in one movie has to play Jesse at almost every single emotion that we've seen Jesse throughout the entirety of Breaking Bad within the course of a 2-hour movie, and that sounds easy because he is returning to a character that made his career and that he is very familiar with and knows how to play very well, but just the level of range and the amount of dark places that he has to get back into, to me, I'm just like, oh my god, the fact that he lands this so well and manages to make this so convincing that I'm buying where Jesse's at, If anything, I may have a problem with how quickly he may have been able to move past, his trauma that he's been through. But the fact that Vince steeps us so much in what he went through and makes you empathize and understand so much, like to a level of like where you're seeing Jesse deal with PTSD, you're seeing him in the flashbacks as a younger kid, you're seeing so many different levels of Jesse to me that like in a way kind of makes the performance more difficult because the whole thing is that throughout the show, as complex as he got, that's still a progressive build over a few years, And regardless of how the different intricacies that are involved with TV acting versus film acting, like I said, I don't want to ditch on actors ever, but it's like, it's a different level, where where with the show, he had time to learn and develop that character versus with the movie, he has to get right into it, He has to get right into it and, oh man, I believed it,
Yeah, I mean, I can see why people would believe it, but for me, it just felt not believable. Yeah. And let's move on.
I'm not gonna lie, that might be an uncurable problem, because we've talked about things on the show, to length, and like you have your opinions and I have my opinions. And we talked about it on Joker and at Astra. There's just some things that like I can't make you see, I can't make you see the light on everything.
Look, here's the thing, man. I hold titles like this to a very high standard, and when they don't meet that ceiling, I'm not gonna lie about it. I'm not just gonna be like, oh, well, people at the water cooler, so to speak, will like me better if I just agree with them on liking this movie.
Right, exactly.
So I'm not going to do that.
That's always a thing, right? And with criticism just in general, and the idea that movies are for everyone, and the old school, for lack of a better word, thought process of go to watch the movie and then everyone talk about it afterwards, and what's everyone gonna be saying about this movie, and
right, because no one wants to feel like they wasted money on a night out.
Not just that. It's not that nobody wants to feel like they wasted their time. It's no one wants to feel left out, and no one wants to feel like the outsider, and that may seem like something really easy, but again, it all has to do with human beings and societal norms. We are very influenced by what the exterior opinion is, regardless of whether we actually believe it or not, to the point where how many times have you been in a setting with someone where they are of the opinion, and it could be something that you totally disagree with, but, simply because of the merit of the points, but because of the person that you're in the setting with, you're just inclined to believe them, It could have nothing to do with their actual points that you're making, but just because they have that sort of persona that you just want to be inclined to agree with, because there's something about them that you can get into, It's literally that,
Yeah, groupthink. I get you.
Groupthink. Yeah.
Now,
and that has so many more layers to it than just, traditional idea of bullying and peer pressure. It's so much more than that.
And you know what? I woke up, and that's not a play on words. It's not because the whole woke culture. I woke up and I started to get my own opinion, big boy opinions, and I don't see things like a lot of people do. I get that. But one of the things I did see in this film that upset me greatly was the lack of urgency, the lack of concern for the situation Jesse was in. What do I mean by that? Here's what I mean.
You didn't feel the ticking clock that should be there and present in every single good movie, because the whole idea is that good screenplays, good filmmaking has that sense of tension throughout, and if they're doing their job, you should never become unaware of that, in terms of the storytelling, and you just felt like that kind of wavered and got lost for you.
That's an element of it. Now, to just be a little more specific on that is, if this movie is predominantly flashbacks, what does that tell me?
Right. And
okay, so he got through those situations? All right, so he's really not at risk right now? Okay. Cops are just driving by him down a freeway, not even taking a second glance at his car?
Right, but that's also just a thing of like,
how
many movies have you seen that in?
So when we
How many movies have you seen that in, though, where that's just a cliche that they still do, A
lot. And that's why I expected more from Breaking Bad, because Breaking Bad did something I hadn't seen before this. You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
That's why I'm upset with this movie. I'm actually a little angered by this movie because of how simplistic and how basic it was. Now, let me keep going on what I was saying, because I want to get your take on this. So we've seen in the movie him getting out of Dodge, right? That's what I've been calling it. And even when we're in the present tense, it's the most idiotic scenarios. It's like, oh, cool, so the cops are like 3 blocks down and we hear the sirens off in the distance, but he's never really that close to him. Like, he gets that car, the El Camino, out, what's his name? Skinny Pete. The cops aren't even on that street, and he's giving him a hug and taking his time, looking his friend in the eyes. Wait, take my beanie. And the cops are still just so far away, dude. Like, his whole threat was sirens off in the distance. Like, so that offered no urgency to me the entire time. And if we are, like I said, predominantly in flashbacks, well, what does that tell me? That tells me that he survived that situation. Yeah, it's fucked up. Yeah, it's sad. I mean, I would hate to know one of my friends was kept in a cage in the ground for a while, but when we see the character and we realize those are flashbacks, he's survived all that. So I wasn't really... What do I care? To be honest with you, what do I care?
It sounds to me like you wanted something from this movie that you ultimately just didn't get, is ultimately what it's sounding like. And
I wanted the depth the show had. And I felt,
and you felt like this didn't
was
have it.
The most hollow version ever. Essentially, someone said, "Hey, here's my thesis script. Let's toss a Breaking Bad skin on this and sell it." And that's fucked up. That's rude. But that's how I felt.
Right, and like I said, I'm not here to dish on your feelings. Like, if that's how you felt, that's how you felt. But my thing,
I guess that's what I saw.
But my thing, and again, I wonder if this just plays into the idea of TV movies and kind of what they accomplish, especially if they happen after the show. But it's like the idea is that I didn't really care about that sense of underlying tension, because to me, I felt like the character work was so strong and so good and so interesting that there wasn't a moment where I was ever bored, Let
me ask you this.
Okay.
Do you plan on going to your high school reunion?
Honestly, I can't say, because I don't know what kind of a place I'm going to be in when my high school reunion happens, So I can't say.
All right, well, at this point in my life, if I can make time for it, I'll go. But if I'm not around, it's not going to kill me.
Right.
And why do I bring this up? Because watching this movie felt like going to a shitty high school reunion where they rented out a Legion Hall, and it was 3 hours of awful catering and seeing people that you really liked, but they've changed. They're not the same anymore.
And they're not the same.
Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I get what
it's
you're
like
saying.
I could have done without going to that high school reunion. I probably would have had a better night if I just got home from work and just relaxed and got ready for the next day. But I went to that high school reunion, and guess what? I'm not getting that night back.
Right. Okay, I get what you're saying there. Yeah, definitely. So this was a sense of where, okay, so I guess the best thing that I can think of in terms of, to wrap up this whole conversation, at least the general topic of discussion.
Also, hey, you know what?
The funny thing is that we talked about very little of the movie, but that's
fine. I want
to
talk more about it. In most movies, I observe a B plot and a C plot.
Right.
Where were those?
I mean, well, the B plot was the flashbacks and how they interspersed.
Oh, okay. So you can argue for that. I wouldn't argue for that.
Because that's literally what was presented to me. So that's what I have.
I figured you would say that, and to me, that's cheap.
Well, I know, but how many movies have we seen that go into flashbacks? Where Godfather 2, one of my favorite movies of all time, literally the entire B plot of that movie is a flashback. in order to show the juxtaposition between characters and how they went and got to their perspective, starting from where they went and to where they ended up in completely different places,
I know, but do you see how different these movies are?
Well, obviously, yeah, but it's the entire idea behind the motivation, whereas the whole idea behind Godfather 1 and 2 is that it was originally conceived as one overall movie. This is conceived literally as an afterthought, as an epilogue, where it's the creator literally thought, okay, what can I do? Well, it was just gnawing at him after all this time where it's like, okay, what did Jesse do, Anyway, it was I almost see this as kind of therapeutic for a way, where he's been going, 4 years now on Better Call Saul, and he's like, okay, yeah, and now he finally was able to do this with Jesse, I see this as very therapeutic and cathartic, and in a way, I knew that feeling, and I knew that I was going to have that feeling going in, with nothing else, knowing nothing else, and expecting nothing else, and in that sense, I was satisfied.
Fair enough, man. I don't want to watch an afterthought. I want to watch something that has just as much thought as the initial series that really was a big part of my, high school years, and I loved watching that show, and I enjoyed it.
Right.
So I don't want to watch an afterthought.
Right. Okay. And I guess in that sense, that's kind of where...
Or if it is an afterthought, I don't want it to feel like one.
Right. And ultimately, at the end of the day, is that, yeah, and the one thing I have said is that, and like I said, I didn't have that many criticisms towards this movie, but the one thing I did say is that, yeah, those flashback sequences went on just a little bit too long. You could have trimmed it. Where I even said, I made this as a joke, but it is true. It's like, yeah, as much as I enjoyed the flashbacks, if you cut all of them from the movie, this movie is 30 minutes long. Not even.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
That's another problem I have with it. Right. But anyways,
that just goes into pacing and that whole thing. So,
and the pacing was god awful for me.
I love the pacing.
We stayed
to me, it was
long.
so methodical and true to what Breaking Bad was. Breaking Bad was never a fast show per se. Yeah, it had its breakneck tense moments, but it was always amazing to me what Vince Gilligan was able to do in terms of establishing so much tension through such methodical thought process and build up, where those situations are not supposed to feel tense until they are.
I said to you after we watched it together the other day, I said it felt like a really, really well done fan film.
Right. Which again, and that goes back to the idea of fan culture and service and the idea of, yeah, Vince Gilligan wanted to do this. It wasn't like a thing that he did where, you hear the Russos all the time talk about how, they keep track of what the fans are saying on Twitter and all that. And that's kind of what spawned this whole idea of fan control over movies. But, yeah, that's kind of where I can go with it.
You know what? I want you to go with it somewhere because I feel like I hope I didn't overstay my welcome with my opinion on this episode. Sorry if people think it wasn't enough of you, but I want to know. What did you like about this movie? Tell me something I don't know, because this is our first time talking about it. Yes, we watched it together a few days ago, but we do a very good job of not speaking about it until the podcast.
For the most part, yeah. And my whole thing with this idea of fan culture and fans driving everything is that it's difficult to say because the whole thing of Hollywood is a business and yeah, fans don't really have an input even though they like to think they do. But in a way they kind of do because this still does provide a way for fans to interact with their media that they watch in a way that has never been present before. And, obviously there's a whole thing of, the best creators are fans originally themselves, but obviously, there's a whole thing of, actually learning how to create too. But yeah, it's just tricky because to me, like I said, I feel like I basically just described this where this is, you know what it was? It's the idea of where I go into a lot of things. It's just the sad space of movies now where I have to go into everything with a grain of salt and with little to no expectation because I found that expectations with anything, even without the big event movies that people tell me to get excited for, that I end up not liking. I have to go into everything now with little to no expectations because that's just how I have been molded by the age that I've grown up with. And that sucks, but there's kind of nothing that I can do about that. And so going into this is something that I never even knew I wanted, right? Where it's kind of the whole thing of where popped, I saw the trailer one day, I'm where I'd heard rumors of this stirring for years, and I'm they're not really gonna do that, but I saw how good Better Call Saul was, and I've heard it from a few people that I do trust about how good the show has gotten, and I liked the first season. It was very well done, and the whole thing with me with Breaking Bad is that, and I've even said this, is that Breaking Bad, while I watched it, this is the way that I described it, was a very slow show, and I would always take my time with it, But those finales, every single one of those finales would be like, holy shit, what is going to happen next? You know, seasons 1, 2, and 3, every single time I would plod my way through that and just be like, okay, you know, it was a show that I took my time with, but I was glad that I took my time with, you know, because that to me was what made the experience. The idea of Breaking Bad to me was not a binge-worthy show, even though that's kind of what gave the show its legacy, was how so many people were able to watch it on Netflix right after the show wrapped up, because of that was when it really kicked off in 2013, 2014, right after the show wrapped up. For me, it was like, what I enjoyed about it was that it wasn't a bingeable show. It wasn't a show that I was like, I finished an episode and it was so high tense and so high octane that I'm like, oh yeah, I gotta watch what happens next. It was a show that, like, I watched an episode or two, I was like, okay, that's pretty good, you know, I would keep going. You know, I made my way through the first season pretty even keel because it was only 7 episodes, but every single time I would get to those finales, I would be like, holy fucking shit, what's gonna happen next, you know? And that to me was what made it brilliant and different from something else, you know? Is that, because the whole thing is the endings not only recontextualize everything that I would watch, but it would also be a thing of where, like, oh my god, this makes, like, everything crazier, you know? And it's like to the point where by the time you did get to 4 or 5 and the final season, where things did ramp up, it was like, oh man, what's gonna happen next, you know? And so this was a thing of where this felt kind of true to me, felt so true to Breaking Bad, in that it is so slow and it is so methodically paced, but at the end of the day, it's like, I wasn't waiting for that explosive climax because I knew there was none, you know, because it's like I said, this is an epilogue. This is just a wrapping up of the story and kind of like a perfect little send off, you know, for like a character that I never would have wanted, you know, because what Vince Gilligan has done with this world that does make it so different is, yeah, there are Easter eggs and yeah, there's all this different stuff for all fans of the show that are diehard. But what I liked is that this was something that felt so true to nature and so true to form that he didn't have to conform to anything in order to kind of appease somebody. You know, he did exactly what he wanted to do, and regardless of whether or not I agree with everything, it stayed true to what I felt Breaking Bad and what I felt would be right for this character, where it's like, yeah, at the end of the day, no, I don't want a movie finishing up after Breaking Bad that's going to follow Jesse Pinkman. Of course I don't want that. But if I had to get this is from the original creator, you know, this is probably the best version that I would want. And that's probably why I enjoy this movie as much as I did, besides everything else that we've already talked about that you and I just disagree on. Fair
enough. And I guess for my closing statement on the film, it would have to be, think about this. We want to know what happens to the characters next, but what we got, for me, like, of course I wanted to know what happened to Jesse Pinkman and all these other characters, but what I got, I almost wish I didn't ask the question, what happens next? Because this movie definitely knocked the Breaking Bad series down a peg for me. Because if this is where that series goes, well, then I want nothing to do with the script after the initial 5 seasons. So I just think we all have to think as consumers of content, yeah, we want to know what's going to happen next. But like in Goodfellas, do we need to know? And is that a reason why that movie, or movies like that, standalones or just series that knew when to call it, have this legacy? We shall see, right? We don't know. Yep. With that being said, we do have to get out of here. We're getting down to the wire. I was about to say,
damn, it's sad that I couldn't convince you otherwise.
No, I mean, hey, man, look, I totally understand why you say what you say. It doesn't sound blasphemous to me.
Well, that's good.
It just sounds like what the other side would think. And that's fine. But your opinion, everything you said sounded educated. It came from a stance where I think a lot of people are going to agree with you, and I think a lot of people are going to think that I'm way older than I am, and that I'm just some old fucking
I don't know about older, because I know plenty of older people that love this show, but it's just, yeah.
I just feel like I sound a little more antiquated than you in this conversation, which is fine. It's just how I feel. But let's give it the rating. Let's let them know where they can find the show, and we'll get out of here.
Well, I mean, it's advertised as Netflix, and everybody watches Netflix, so we don't need to tell people where this is going to be, because they're going to know it's on Netflix.
Well, I meant like our show.
Yeah, but our show. Our show. So you can find us on Anchor, Spotify, iTunes, wherever, Google Play, wherever you listen to podcasts, everywhere but SoundCloud. At Talkin TV Podcast. And in terms of my final rating, for me, again, this is great. This is another 4.5 out of 5-star movie for me.
Crazy.
Sorry you feel that way.
And I mean this like...
What are you going to give it? 2? 1? Less than 1?
0.5.
Ooh, there we go. There's the over-exaggerated version of internet troll Chris that we all love.
No, this isn't a movie to me. This is appeasement. This is 2 hours of appeasement.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was shot on. Well, to compare you to one Martin Scorsese, this was shot on camera and edited and involved actors. So
right. I know it's a movie. I know it's a movie. I know it's a movie, but it's not a fucking movie.
Yeah, you
right?
know.
Open your eyes, people.
You know I'm gonna do
Open your goddamn eyes. You know how Dom always has the thing he says at the end of shows? I want to fucking say one thing on this episode. Stop being a goddamn puppet. Open your fucking eyes and realize that not everything that has a big marketing campaign is actually good.
Well, I mean, you're already fighting a losing battle there because people only go based on what advertisers and marketers tell them to go see. So
right, but if I turn 5 people, maybe they'll turn 5 more. And so a snowball effect could happen.
All right, we'll
now,
see.
Dom, do you have anything you want to leave the people with? Maybe on a more positive note?
I mean, I'm just gonna end it with the same thing I always end it with, which is watch more fucking movies, and not just, but to counteract off of Chris and kind of to bring this whole kind of argument, for lack of a better word, into one final merging point is that I do agree, watch more movies. But I should probably clarify in the sense of when I talk about that, I don't mean just watch just more content in general, because there's already too much content to keep track of. I'm talking watch something that you feel is going to make a difference, not in terms of big, grand, world-changing. Watch something that is going to make a difference to you. Make a difference in the way that you think, you know? Like Chris says, because that is one thing that we do agree on. I don't necessarily agree in terms of that just because, you know, corporations control the world and money is the way the world goes and only people ever control the world, because those are the only people that can make it that far. Because good people always die or get disillusioned along the way. But, yeah, the reason why I always say watch more movies is because watching movies to me is what has made my life worth living. And it's also, it gives me an understanding just of human beings that nothing else is giving me. So that's what I mean when I say watch more movies. Don't watch advertisements. Don't watch theater shows that are just there to entertain and mind numb you. Watch movies. Think about stuff so that you can have fun conversations like this.
Exactly, guys. And, thank you again for listening. We appreciate all the support. This is a new show, so you guys just tuning in means a lot. And again, that's at Talkin TV, anywhere that matters.